The wind outside howled like it was mourning something unseen. In the town of Elmridge, known more for its wheat fields than its warmth, the schoolhouse stood alone at the edge of the valley, paint chipping, roof leaking, and windows so thin they whispered with every gust. Inside, Miss Clara Wynne stood at the front of her classroom, chalk trembling in her hand. She had once been the heartbeat of this forgotten place, but this morning, something inside her had gone still. Her mouth opened, but no words came, not a sound, just a dry gasp where her voice should have been. The children watched in frozen confusion as Clara gripped the desk for balance. For 5 years, she'd taught here without fail. She was their orphaned teacher, the woman who'd grown up in this very valley, raised by nuns, hardened by loss, and somehow still soft enough to sing lullabies to broken hearts. But now, as the morning sun poured through cracked glass, Clara was silent, not by choice, not by fear, but by something darker, something that had followed her from her past. She tried again to speak, but only a rasp came. Her fingers went to her throat. Nothing was wrong physically, but the sound was gone. Panic didn't rise. It settled. Like fog. The students sat quietly, unsure of what to do. When the bell rang, they shuffled out, glancing back over their shoulders at the woman who always spoke with kindness, now reduced to a silent statue behind her desk. When the last child left, Clara collapsed into her chair and cried without sound. Her tears traced lines down her cheek, but there was no sobbing, only the steady ache of something missing. For Clara Wynne had not just lost her voice. She had lost the one thing this town couldn't afford to lose, its last thread of hope. No doctor could explain it. Stress, they said. Grief, probably. But Clara had not cried at her parents' funeral. She had not faltered when she was handed an envelope saying the church could no longer fund her salary. She had not broken when a developer tried to buy the schoolhouse and turn it into a gas station. Her voice had survived all of that. But now, in the quietest season of her life, it was gone. The townspeople noticed quickly. Parents whispered outside the grocery store. She can't teach anymore. How will the kids learn? Shouldn't she be replaced? No one said it to her face. They never did. Elmridge was polite like that. They just faded away like leaves after a storm. She would walk into stores and the clerks would smile too hard, as if her silence was a disease they could catch. And yet, Clara still showed up to class every day. She used chalkboards, hand signs, pictures, anything to keep teaching. But it wasn't enough. Attendance dropped. One parent withdrew her son, saying Clara's silence was unnatural. Another claimed their daughter had nightmares from seeing a teacher who spoke with her eyes instead of her voice. Eventually, the school board came knocking. A meeting was held. No one asked Clara to speak. They voted in hushed tones, and by the end of that week, the letter came. Termination. No warning, no compensation, no farewell, just silence, returned in paper form. She sat in the empty classroom that Friday afternoon, staring at the same blackboard she once used to draw stars and hope. Now, it stared back like a tombstone. That night, Clara packed her books and papers into a small box and walked home under the cold breath of winter. Her little cottage at the edge of town felt emptier than usual. She lit a single candle and stared into its flame for hours, remembering the hymns her mother used to sing. She had not sung in years, not since the accident that took both her parents. But she remembered the words. She remembered the melodies. That night, though she could not speak, she hummed, barely audible, just enough to feel human. The next morning, her humming stopped. She found the strength to pick up her pen. If her voice had left her, maybe her story hadn't. So she began to write. The first sentence she wrote trembled across the page like a newborn fawn learning to stand. I was once the voice of children who had none. The ink bled slowly into the paper, but Clara pressed on. Her cottage became her classroom now, and the blank pages her new students. She wrote not just her story, but the stories of the children she had taught. The boy who cried every morning but drew galaxies in math class. The girl who stuttered in front of others but read poetry to the trees when she thought no one was listening. The children had always been her voice. Now she would be theirs. Word by word, sentence by sentence, she poured her soul onto paper. Every hour spent writing became a hymn to the life she'd lived before the silence. Outside her home, the world went on. Spring came and melted the frost, but no one visited Clara's doorstep. She became part of the landscape, like the old barn, the rusted water tower, the forgotten mile marker at the road's end. But inside her house, something burned brighter than any fire. She wrote at dawn. She wrote by candlelight. She wrote until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred. Her silence no longer hurt. It healed. Because every page she filled gave shape to what she'd always feared, that she was invisible, that her life had passed quietly, like a breeze no one noticed. But the words told another story. They screamed in ink what her voice could not. They testified. Then one day, a storm rolled through Elmridge, thunder loud enough to rattle glass. The old schoolhouse, already weak and forgotten, collapsed under the weight of wind and neglect. The town gathered the next morning, heads bowed, eyes wide. A landmark gone. An era ended. Clara stood in the distance, hidden behind her shawl. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. But she felt something stir. A voice, not her own, but memory's echo, reminding her that silence could never destroy truth. That night, she wrote for 14 straight hours. When she finally stopped, her hands trembling from exhaustion, she had written the last words of her manuscript. She titled it, The Voice of the Orphaned Teacher. The next challenge came quietly, like everything else in her life, how to share it with the world. She had no computer, no internet, just paper, and a burning need to be heard. So she walked to the post office with her handwritten draft, sealed in a brown envelope addressed to the largest publishing house she could find in a worn-out phone book. She couldn't call them. She couldn't explain. She simply attached a note that read, If you read even the first page, you will hear what I cannot say. Then she dropped it into the box and walked away, unsure if it would ever land in the right hands. Weeks passed. Then, months. Her life returned to quiet days filled with garden work, bread baking, and humming, always humming. She had made peace with her silence. And then, on a day like any other, a knock shattered her stillness. A young woman stood at her door with a letter in her hand and tears in her eyes. She introduced herself with trembling lips. "I'm from Haven Books," she whispered. "And your words, they changed me." Clara blinked, her fingers tightening around the doorknob. The woman handed her a typed contract and an envelope containing something Clara had never touched in her life, a check worth more than she had ever earned in 20 years of teaching. And at that moment, the silence felt like music. The day her book was published, Clara sat alone in her cottage, staring at the cover on her lap. It bore no flashy design, just a hand-drawn sketch of a schoolhouse under an open sky. Beneath it, in quiet lettering, The Voice of the Orphaned Teacher, by Clara Wynne. She couldn't read the back without choking on her breath, not from sadness, but from the awe of being seen. For decades, she had been a whisper in a crowded world, a fading footprint in a field of noise. Now she was in ink, permanent. Her voice, though silent, was traveling farther than she ever had. The first review came in a small corner of an education magazine, then another in a teaching blog. Then a parent posted a photo online, clutching the book to her chest, saying, "This saved my son." Within days, it was everywhere. People passed it around in staff rooms, read chapters aloud in classrooms, quoted her words in town hall meetings. Teachers wept. Students listened. Mothers whispered the lines into their babies' ears. Strangers wrote letters to her, hundreds of them, addressed simply to the orphaned teacher, Elmridge. Somehow, everyone found her. A reporter from a national network drove hours through dusty roads just to sit outside her home and film the roses growing along her porch. They didn't demand interviews. They just captured the silence and called it powerful. Clara never opened her mouth, but her presence alone said more than headlines ever could. Cameras zoomed in on her hands, the same hands that once held chalk and trembling pencils, now flipping through pages that sparked a national movement. Her story, once buried by poverty and forgotten sidewalks, had bloomed like wildflowers in broken ground. And then came the moment that changed everything. A famous folk singer, known for her haunting voice and soul-deep lyrics, read Clara's book on a flight. She cried through the final chapter. When she landed, she locked herself in a studio and didn't leave for 3 days. What emerged was an acoustic ballad titled "The Voice She Carried." The first verse was pulled directly from Clara's words. The chorus? A melody inspired by Clara's own humming. When the song dropped, no one was prepared for what followed. It went viral in hours. Not because it was catchy, but because it ached. Because it felt like every quiet soul had suddenly been heard. People across the country lit candles for teachers who never gave up. School children sent voice recordings of themselves reading Clara's lines into the void, like prayers. Protesters used her story to demand better funding for schools. Musicians covered the song in a dozen languages. Even the president quoted her during an education reform speech. "To lose your voice is not the same as losing your power," he said, "because sometimes the loudest truth is the one carried by silence." And Clara? She sat in her little cottage, still humming. She had never left Elmridge, never stood on a stage, never gave a speech, but somehow millions had heard her, and still not a word had passed her lips. As Clara sat in the quiet calm of her garden, a new sound drifted through the trees. A child's voice, singing, faint but clear, like sunlight breaking through fog. She looked up. Down the road came a group of children from the new school in town, now rebuilt with modern halls and electronic bells, but something about their walk felt older, sacred. One of them held a Bluetooth speaker, and from it came "The Voice She Carried." The singer's voice wrapped around the air, raw and trembling. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a ritual, something people played when words failed them. The children stopped near her fence and stared, unsure if they should approach. Clara smiled and nodded gently, her face creased with warmth. One girl stepped forward, clutching a handmade notebook. She opened it and held it toward Clara. Inside, a short note. "We read your book in class. I want to be a teacher because of you." Clara placed her hand on her heart. The girl placed hers over it too, mimicking her silently. They didn't need sound to understand one another. That night, Clara lit a candle and stared at the framed photograph of her old classroom, the one that collapsed in the storm. She had thought it was the end, but the song, the book, the children, they had turned the ruin into roots, and the roots had spread. Across counties, across countries. She began receiving invitations, universities, libraries, education summits. All wanted to honor her. But she declined them all. Clara didn't want applause. She only wanted the story to go where she could never go. Then one envelope changed that. It came from a school in New York City. Inside was a small letter, barely a paragraph long. We have 50 children who can't speak. Their teachers read your book to them. Now they hum your song every morning before class. Would you come and sit with them? You don't need to say anything. Just be here." She read the letter 3 times. Her fingers trembled. For years, she had been surrounded by silence. But this was a choir of silence. She packed her small bag and took her first flight in decades. When she arrived at the school, the children were waiting. Some in wheelchairs, some with sign language clapping, others with wide, glowing eyes. They didn't speak. They sang. A slow hum filled the room. Her melody, now theirs. Clara stood in the middle of them, and for the first time tears streamed down her face, not from grief, but from arrival. Not from loss, but from return. These were her people, children who didn't need noise to matter. They communicated in looks, in rhythm, in energy. She sat in a circle with them. One by one, they passed around a handmade copy of her book, each child tracing their finger along a sentence as if it were sacred scripture. It was then Clara realized this was her real classroom now. And in that moment, something miraculous happened. A boy took her hand and whispered one word. "Sing." Clara's lips parted. No one expected sound, not even her. But the note came, soft, thin, fragile as a falling petal. She sang. The sound that left Clara's lips wasn't loud. It wasn't even strong. It wavered like the first note of a bird learning flight. But it was real. After all the silence, all the pages, all the songs sung by others, her own voice returned. And the children heard it, not just through their ears, but through their hearts. They leaned in as if witnessing magic. For in that small classroom, tucked inside a city that never slept, a woman who once thought her silence was a curse had become the chorus of something much greater. The teachers gasped. Some wept. A few began recording, not for fame or virality, but because they knew they were witnessing the kind of moment the world tries so hard to forget. A miracle, quiet and soft. Clara finished the line with a breath, her throat aching but free. She didn't try for more. That single note was enough. It was her amen. The children clapped, not with noise but with open hands waving gently, a sign they had created just for her. Back in Elmridge, news traveled fast. The woman they once whispered about, the teacher they replaced without apology, had sung in a classroom full of voiceless children in one of the largest cities in the world. And though no one from the school board called, and the newspapers only wrote one article, it didn't matter. Because Clara hadn't sung for applause. She had sung because her soul had something left to say. After returning home, Clara found a pile of mail waiting. Gifts, letters, art from classrooms all across the globe. One small envelope carried no return address. Inside was a gold-embossed invitation. The note read, "You've been nominated for the National Legacy in Education Award. The ceremony will be televised. No need to speak. Just come." She didn't go. Instead, she sat on her porch, candle glowing beside her, watching children from town ride past her gate on bicycles and scooters. They waved, and she waved back. A local boy stood outside her fence and asked, "Are you the woman in the song?" Clara smiled and nodded. "My mom plays it every night," he said. "She says it helps her sleep." That night, Clara stood beside the cracked mirror in her bedroom and looked at herself as if seeing an old friend. The lines on her face told a story, not of age, but of resilience. She placed a record on the player, a vinyl version of the voice she carried. As the first notes rang out, she hummed along, not because she had to, but because she could. In the months that followed, a foundation was created in her name. The Clara Win Initiative. Its mission was simple, to find teachers whose voices were fading and remind the world how powerful they truly were. Scholarships were funded. Community schools were rebuilt. And most important of all, children were taught that silence is not weakness. It's a different kind of strength. Clara passed away peacefully 2 winters later. Her funeral was not grand. No celebrity tributes. Just students, hundreds of them, lighting candles in cities, towns, and villages. In every school library where her book now sat, a plaque was placed above it. She lost her voice, but gave us all something to sing. And every year on the day her book was first published, students gather in silence, place a hand over their heart, and hum the tune she once carried alone. Now millions carry it for her.